Hey, everybody, this is Dr. Russ Jones.
And this is his cohort, Brad Kennan.
We are wide open. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. I'm here in the land of the little people. You can see from behind me.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I had to tell you, I'm feeling like a freaking champion tonight, but I want to know why there is bunk beds behind you. Is there? Are you in trouble? Do we need to intervene in your relationship?
I've been relegated to the children's room this week.
The children's room.
That is not true. This is where the office is. I am out of town.
Okay.
I'm out of the bunker in Ohio, and I'm in sunny Florida for a week with some other Bigfooters. And we're not on a true expedition, but we did go out today. We got out in the swamps. We ran into a couple spots. You drive back a road 4 or 5 miles in a swamp, and literally the road's impassable. At that point in time in the past, we would simply turn around and go the other direction. We did not. I'm down here with Sipley. He's a pilot. He's got a thermal drone. We get our drones out, throw them up in the air, and literally, I look over and he's flying his drone, and he's a quarter mile, a half mile away, zipping around with the thermal on, just looking through the swamps, seeing what we can find. So it's a fun getaway down here because Ohio's not that great this time of year, but I'm glad I'm with a couple another Bigfooter, and we're out actually getting in the swamps, and we're going to get out in the swamps later this week, get them out at night, get those thermals out, and see what we can find.
I can tell you got a little sun, so you're losing your albinoism this week.
Right.
I might have to be out there. It's like 60 and sunny here in the valley the next couple of days, so I'm gonna have to try to do something to make sure I'm staying darker than you, so people don't.
Yeah, well, nope.
Yeah,
I plan on going on a fishing charter hopefully by the end of the week. So I got you.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and in fact, I really, like I said, I wanted to do this out on the deck or out on the balcony. We're on the 8th floor. Do it out on the balcony with the ocean behind me because we're right on the ocean. Except I didn't want the sound of the ocean impacting my voice in the broadcast. So I really want to think about the listeners, and I just didn't want.
You didn't want to hear me whine and sob,
right?
That you are once again in some southern tropical paradise while I continue to grind up here in our abhorrent gray winter.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for you.
You don't seem sorry, man. And you're out there. You simply are having fun. You're doing your drone thing everywhere.
I'm wiping the tears from my eyes.
I can tell. It's probably the salt water is probably spraying in your eyes. Do you have a little door open there so you can smell the ocean?
This part of the condo is not facing the ocean. It's actually facing the street. So, no, I'm slumming it on this side of the condo this week. So,
man, I hate that you have to suffer through this. And I know when I was talking to T-Mac, which is Sipley's wife, she said, "Oh, Brad and Diane had to go down a couple days early because there was a storm coming through." And I was like, "Storm? I mean, we got like an inch of snow."
We got 5 inches of snow.
So you live in Central Ohio, and 5 inches is traumatizing you. So you need to.
It's not traumatizing me. The simple fact that I've been in Ohio the entire winter, I could not take it anymore, and I will admit that. I'm like, I'm out.
I get you.
I'm out. So we have another northerner from the country up north coming on.
Okay.
This is an author, journalist, very well read, very well traveled. John Zada. Going to welcome him to the program. Hey, John, how you doing?
I just felt like I was beamed in like Star Trek. Where am I?
Hey, hello, guys. We're special. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So this took us a while to get this hooked up. I think we're all busy. Especially you're a journalist. You wrote a book that kind of caught my eye a while ago, In the Valley of the Noble Giants, The Search for Sasquatch, I think is what it was called. Would you say 2019 Amazon's book of the year in that genre? Is that true, Russ?
So yes. Close. In the valleys, plural, of the noble beyond. Okay. And yes, it came out in 2019.
I apologize.
No, it's okay.
I'm dyslexic sometimes.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's happened before. It's a long name title. So 2019 it came out, published by kind of like a early mainstream publisher in New York City called Grove Press. They're like a old storied New York Manhattan publisher. And yeah, somehow miraculously the book was chosen by Amazon as one of its top 100 reads.
So how did a mainstream publisher, you hear most of the time when you talk to Russ can talk about this, if you're a Bigfooter or a Sasquatch, you write a book, or you're a UFO person or something like that, you write a book, it is going to be published by a small publishing house because they simply don't believe that there's a large audience for what you're writing. But obviously that was untrue somehow. How did you get that to happen?
Well, I've been working as a journalist in various capacities for many years prior to that, in the mainstream primarily. So, news writing, freelance writing, travel writing, articles for magazines and newspapers. So, I mean, I was in that realm to begin with, essentially. And so, when I came to, I got myself an agent. She's a fairly prominent agent here in Canada and has access to all of the big publishers. And she went knocking on all the doors, essentially. And like a lot of people and their stories about getting their books bought, we got turned down by many of them until the very, very, very end. And then this New York publisher came on and they really liked it. And it's sort of, as a genre, it fit with what they were putting out. It's a work of narrative nonfiction, which essentially means that it's nonfiction written in a fiction-like way. So with characters, with dialogue, with a story arc, and it's written in the first person. So it's a bit different than, say, the more kind of like factual nonfiction where it's just sort of the laying out of facts. This is kind of like, it's a travel memoir. And I think that's kind of and that was my intention. I really wanted to do something that was a bit different from the other Bigfoot Sasquatch books. And partly because I'm not like a researcher per se. I became a researcher for the purpose of the book. But I really did want to tell a story and kind of have fun with it and sort of and be a travel writer, because that's what I'd been doing for years prior to that. But to answer your question more directly, because there is actually a very specific answer to that very good question. And I didn't discover this until after the book came out, as I was working with the publisher to promote the book and to do publicity and marketing and the whole thing. One of my editors at the publishing company, who was sort of behind the scenes at first, he kind of came to the forefront to work with me later when the book came out for reasons which are a long story. He's an older gentleman. I think he may be in his mid 60s now, or late 60s even. He was a big Sasquatch enthusiast in the 70s. And he was a subscriber to Peter Burns' Bigfoot News paper newsletter. And he even he kept some and showed them to me online and everything. And it was really him who green lit the project. And that's kind of the way it works in publishing, like with the big publishers. Like it really comes down to the editors really wanting personally to work on something that they are very interested themselves personally. It's a very subjective process. I mean, there's a financial and an economic marketing aspect to the books that they choose, but whenever an editor champions a book, it's because they want to work on it. And I think he was really quite enthused with the idea of, I guess, revisiting his youth or his past obsession with the subject.
Now, were you I mean, how did you, somebody just doesn't randomly say, I'm going to write about Sasquatch and going out and looking for Sasquatch. Either most people have an experience, they see something happens to a relative possibly, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Did something happen to you, or did you just say, hey, you know, I think this is a good topic, I want to write about this?
Yeah, it was a combination of a few things. I grew up with an interest in it, like so many people, like so many of us our age, essentially. But
Sure.
I read John Green's books as a kid. I was sort of a little bit not an advanced reader, but I kind of like, I learned to read very quickly as a young child. So I was kind of reading adultish books by age 8 or 9. And so I would go to the library and I found these books by John Green, and I read them all and I became interested. And so essentially the story of how the book came to be from an interest perspective was, I did my first trip to British Columbia, which I'd always the place fascinated me to no end as I was growing up. This kind of mountainous wilderness, like just really big country, forested region. And I had a chance to go out there to visit a friend. And when we were out hiking, during that trip, it was wintertime. It was in a town called Nelson, which is in the Kootenay region of southeastern British Columbia, I would say. Mm-hmm. We went out hiking like in the winter, kind of along this sort of old railway, and we thought we'd heard something kind of paralleling us up the mountainside, kind of like a bipedal type of like walking sound through the snow. And I think what made it kind of Sasquatchy in my mind, I mean, I was predisposed to seeing it that way because of my interest, but it was really loud. It was a very, very loud plodding, and there was a lot of heavy breathing, and it was kind of like almost like in stereo surround sound. It was so loud, and you could almost kind of, you would imagine it would be right there by how loud it was, but you couldn't see anything. Like there was no movement in the trees. There was nothing. Yet it was like this really, really loud thing. And it sort of was, it sounded agitated. It was like it went and then it came, and then we kind of ran out of there. And I think that sort of that experience, and we never saw it, and there was nothing definitive, but I think that experience, marked me in the sense that like, I kind of was like, oh, like, this thing is still going on, and I've had maybe a brush with it, maybe not, kind of thing. And so I just then kind of from there on in, I just kind of paid attention to the subject. And a few years later, I went to a Sasquatch symposium in Vancouver, British Columbia. I think it was in '99, a couple of years after I visited Nelson. And just because I thought, oh, like maybe I'd already started doing documentary work, and thought maybe about making a film about it, kind of thing. And I went to go there to do some preliminary research. And at the event, John Bindernagel was there, who's also in my book. And I didn't really get into the details of having met him at the symposium and having become his friend, but he was there. Grover Krantz was speaking. Renee DeHinden was there, although in the audience, kind of as a heckler type, kind of like a contrarian guy. I actually saw them get into like a really, really bad verbal argument, like during one of the intermissions, like out in the foyer, kind of thing.
I mean, I thought Renee DeHinden, I thought he was he's a Bigfoot guy, right, Russ?
Yeah, he's one of the 4 horsemen.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So what's the? I mean,
he didn't get along with anybody, though.
Okay.
Yeah, he had his own. He was just this sort of, I mean, I'm sure you've all kind of heard. He's this sort of, curmudgeonly.
Yeah.
He was a true contrarian. I mean, if you had to kind of come up with a textbook definition, you would kind of present him to the world, sort of thing. And he had his own ways of doing things and presenting evidence and all of that. And so just these sorts of things sort of continued. I just became more and more interested. And then finally, when I became a travel writer years later, I had the opportunity to go back to British Columbia to a place known as the Great Bear Rainforest. And to do a travel piece, to do a magazine feature essentially about this kind of like somewhat up and coming, wilderness region that is very hard to access. It's essentially the central and the north coast of BC. Same ecosystem as pretty much the same ecosystem as the Olympic Peninsula, like Olympic National Park, but maybe 8 to 10 times the size. That goes all the way up to the Alaska Panhandle, starting from around the parallel of northern Vancouver Island. And I was going to Bella Bella, I was going to Bella Coola, and I was going to another First Nations community. They're all First Nations communities, by the way, called Klemtu, which is closer to that Alaskan Panhandle. And I kind of knew, I did know that I was going into Sasquatch habitat, and that was maybe sort of the deeper motivations for the trip. But I was going there as a travel writer, and by some kind of strange coincidence, because it doesn't happen all the time with such frequency, all of the communities were having a whole bunch of sightings that summer. It was a
Really?
2-week trip. Yeah. I started in Bella Bella. I went to Klemtu, and then I went to Bella Coola, and it was just like the hottest topic. And that was around the time as well when finding Bigfoot was really had reached its sort of pinnacle of popularity. So I think there was a kind of, the people living there were much more open about talking about this stuff. I think the show had really kind of broken the taboo in a lot of, especially with Indigenous people. And so when I got there, it was like there was all this stuff going on, and essentially, like within days, I just started chasing these stories, one leading to the other in the different communities. And then my article, which was for a Canadian, a travel magazine that I just recently folded, that was kind of catered to sort of young backpacker type people and stuff. But my article became a kind of about Sasquatch, as well as the Great Bear Rainforest. But I managed to fuse them together.
So you were this believer. I would assume you were kind of this believer at this point in time because you had your experience when you were younger. Did any of maybe some of the stories you heard up there, did anything stand out to you? Like, wow, that could have been an amazing experience for one of these Indigenous people that they had.
Yeah, there were a handful actually, and a few of them I mentioned in my book.
Okay,
saying that I had heard about these stories the previous trip, because the book continues. The book starts off where my magazine trip is, and then it's about me going back the year after. And so so in Bella Bella, the first big story that captured my attention was they're known as the Heiltsuk First Nation, and in Bella Bella, they've got a youth camp to teach, I guess, their culture and their cultural ways on the mainland. Bella Bella is on an island, and so if you travel southeast from the island onto the mainland, there's a river valley which has been unlogged. It's a pristine, unlogged, maybe one of the cleanest watersheds on maybe the entire Pacific coast.
Okay.
They were visited where they have a lot of Sasquatch activity on and off over the years. They had just been visited by a creature. I think it was weeks before, or maybe if not even a week or several days before, a creature had come into where the kids where the camp counselors, I think, were staying. And so that whole incident really kind of freaked the community. It ended up running off and everything, but it was in kind of full moon, and I think they had to resort to bear bangers, or somebody had a gun and fired it into the air to scare it off. And it was it's a big deal over there, as you know, because there is a sort of a spiritual and supernatural significance. And for them, it was it's a frightening experience for anybody at night, obviously. Right. So, in such an incredibly wild place. And so, so yeah, and every community had a handful of stories that had happened that summer. So
Okay.
it wasn't even just like stuff 7, 8, 10
Yeah,
years ago.
This wasn't stuff from the 1800s that they're pulling out, grandpa out of the back to tell you a story. This is stuff that's literally occurring when you're there prior to when you're coming there.
Mm-hmm.
So you're getting all these great stories and this interaction with these people. And, Sasquatch is different in the indigenous, they all have these different words and they've been around, and it's, this oral history of them, and especially I would think up in that area. It's probably a pretty, a lot of people disappear, I think, up in that. Is that kind of that highway up there where everybody disappears? Is that kind of up in that
it's
area?
Not, yeah, the highway is not far from there. It's sort of just north of, the northern boundary of the Great Bear Rainforest. But
okay. Because that's, that's a famous highway that literally, it's like the most, something about, more people per capita disappear on that highway than anywhere in the.
Is that the one with they find the shoes, or is that something else that I'm thinking?
No,
about?
Well, this highway's kind of more. It's more tied with missing and murdered Indigenous women. That there was a serial.
Okay.
Criminal.
Is that what it was? I couldn't remember that. I know that there was a backstory to it, and I didn't know what it relegated to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't know kind of where it falls into the whole missing 411 kind of map or scheme, but it is one of the most remote stretches of. I mean, there's a lot in Canada. I mean, you go north from the border, from one end of the country to the other. It's you get up to the North Pole essentially, but it's very thick, coastal temperate rainforest, really big trees, impenetrable bush. It's like there isn't even really a lot of hiking except near a few of the communities, and there's one road that leads to Bella Coola that comes from the interior of the province. It's a 20-hour drive from Vancouver and stuff. And so it's essentially you get in by plane or by boat. There's a BC ferry that kind of it goes up to, almost up to Alaska. And so, but it's really hard to get to. And yes, and you could very easily find yourself, in trouble if you don't really know what you're doing up there. So, it's
so how long did it take you to put the experience together? Your book, was this 1 year of experiences? Does your book take over 2 years? How, you said it stopped at kind of where the end of your article was, and you kind of went forward. So
yeah, it's a very it's an interesting question that relates to process. And so the book, which I have a copy of right here, just to show.
Absolutely.
I've read it. Great book.
And it's a story which chronicles a 3-month trip. So it's not a lengthy journey in the sense of it was like years. However, after having gone up there for that 3-month trip and then realizing, oh my God, I have to write this book. And I'm not only writing a book about Sasquatch. I mean, I had the decades of reading and listening to media, and but I had to write about wildlife. I had to write about forest. I had to write about the ocean. I had to write about the communities. And so I'm like, man, I kind of feel a little bit unprepared, not totally unprepared, but just I felt like I could really top up my knowledge here. So as I worked on the book, I went back repeatedly to go stay up there to do further research and to I wrote most of the book up there. So I've probably spent over a year, I spent over a year's worth of time, maybe even maybe more. I didn't really count, but I made several trips back. I did other trips into the Great Bear Rainforest and stuff. So it became kind of this immersive experience that maybe I did another 4 years worth of traveling up there and did even further Sasquatch research up there to kind of fortify my knowledge, I guess you could say. So it was both. The book is both a story about a relatively short trip, but it's backed up with knowledge accumulated as I was writing it, sort of thing. So like when I first went there, I didn't know the difference between a bear bed and a bear den. You know what I mean? And those sorts of details are important, because or the foliage or the different types of trees or whatever.
Your listeners will know, or they will let you know what the difference is.
Right.
Believe me,
right.
I don't read most of the comments, because I say some things on here that I think I know, or I'll preface it with, well, I think this is how it works, and believe me, if I'm not right, they do let me know. So you wrote this book about Sasquatch. Are you a believer?
Yeah, I would say I mostly am. So I maybe where I would differ in that would be in that I don't really try and convince people about. I used to before I wrote the book. I was sort of I would kind of get into the arguments and everything, and then what I did for the book was I went in leaning towards the existence of the creatures, but then I'm like, okay, well, for the exercise of the book, I'm going to actually try and convince myself that I don't know, right? And I was mostly successful. I don't know. Maybe it was more of a posture that I kind of adopted, but I went into the project sort of saying, okay, I don't know. I haven't seen one. I'm going to try and be kind of unsure about it. And I found over the years, as I was working on the project, I would move a bit more this way, I would move a bit more that way. When I was in the city, when I was in Toronto, just the nature of the concrete big city environment you don't think about it as much in that way. You kind of are a bit more dismissive. But then when you're back over there, it's like when you see that landscape with all of the mist and the trees, and when you're flying over it in a plane. I flew over this region in some small planes a few times. Man, it was just it was maybe the most unbelievable visual sight I'd ever seen. I just could not believe. And this was not very high up. This was maybe about 3,000, like a Cessna type flight.
Most people can't understand that you can fly for hours in a plane, and still not see a city.
No, absolutely,
in that environment. So
I really kind of got into the whole push and pull. I allowed myself to get into the push and pull for the purpose of the book, because I was telling a story that you need a little bit of conflict, you need a bit of tension. So I thought I would play up the skeptical side a little bit and kind of have that as a kind of a push and pull that kind of was fighting over my soul in the story, because it's sort of it was a kind of a quest to figure out, okay, well, what the hell is going on? And my naive assumption going in was, okay, I'm going to figure it out one way or the other. But but then as you get into the latter part of the book, it became more about what is the meaning of the creature, and less about kind of binary yes versus no, exist versus not exist. So fast forward, jumping to the present, I guess to sort of to put it in a kind of in shorthand, I still do lean towards it, because I've just heard so many fascinating stories, and I think there's so much that is truly unexplainable about it. I guess I tend to kind of to sort of not, try and force people to see it, because ultimately I haven't seen one yet, so I can't.
Well, I've seen 3, so I don't try to convince anybody anything either. Mm-hmm. Believe me, don't believe me, I don't care. Mm-hmm. Most people, if they know me, met me, I'm a pretty straightforward person. I'm not going to tell you a story. I've seen them. I remember Matt Moneymaker from the show. We were having a discussion one time, and he says, explain it like this. He says, if you're in a courtroom and you are in a trial and you're on a jury, and it's saying that this guy robbed a bank. Now, as a juror, you did not see him rob a bank, but you trot out 400 eyewitnesses that saw him rob the bank. You know, I saw him from the inside of the bank, you saw him from the outside of the bank, and then you saw him get him to the car, and then you saw him drive away. So even though you didn't see him rob the bank, 400 people did. So are you going to believe the 400 people, or are you going to believe that you didn't see it? So if you have 400 witnesses that have very similar accounts from different aspects, different viewpoints of multiple sightings of multiple creatures across the country or the world, are you going to believe their existence? And I said, absolutely. I believe their existence. So,
it makes for a very convincing case, obviously, if you've got that many.
Right.
So,
yeah, and just consider in the BFRO, there's 80,000 reports, modern day reports. That's just one group which collects primary, and we estimate that 1 out of every 20 reports actually gets, put in. Probably 90% of them are junk, but you're left with thousands and thousands of high quality reports.
Right.
One of the things I thought was interesting about the book is that you said that it really wasn't so much about Sasquatch. It's about how we see what we want to see and don't see what we are not prepared to see. And I thought that was such a great quote and such, just something you ponder about. Do you want to say anything about that? Your opinion on that?
So this was the other, I guess, pillar or stream of interest that I took into the book project was I had an interest for years prior to that in the psychology of perception and cognition, and just kind of like, I kind of trying to understand how we see the things that we see and how we come to our ideas and how we come to knowledge and this sort of thing. So I, again, kind of following that compass that that compass reading that I had sort of aimed for to make the book kind of almost multidisciplinary and multi-layered. I thought, okay, why not explore these issues of psychology, or these the perception topic and whatnot, and just to kind of, because by doing so you're not necessarily being dismissive or rejecting of the hypothesis, of the idea that these creatures exist. In fact, it may even improve the scientific process or the collection of evidence, or kind of, because a lot of people jump to conclusions. So I was just very interested in sort of, and this particularly with the Bindernagel story at the beginning, about how he was the scientist and how he was really trying to educate his colleagues, or at least kind of make them open enough to acknowledge that there might be something to consider here. He was a bit of a tragic figure in the book, because he was he was rejected at every turn, and kind of and even in my dealings with him, even before the book and after, and as I was writing the book, he just was constantly on the cusp of giving up. And so I just found this whole thing interesting, and why society rejects the idea, and even the issue of what is the Sasquatch, and how is it that such a thing could exist, yet we don't really have better evidence of it, and how is our perception, how does that play into it? And so that's a whole sort of area that I kind of jump in and out of in the book. And I figured that I could do so, yet at the same time not necessarily reject the whole idea of the creature.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, because we have, from that perspective, the people that are going out there and believe and want to see it are seeing it. And then you have these other groups of people that, have hunted their whole lives and don't believe because they have not seen it, and kind of discard at will. It is an interesting contrast.
Well, it is kind of funny though. You talk to there was a gentleman that was a firm non-believer in Sasquatch. Firm. Nope, never seen one. They don't exist. I go deer hunting 100 times, 100. I'm in the woods 100 days, 130 days a year, blah blah blah. And I said, well, have you ever had something like this happen? Well, there was this one time. You know what I mean? He goes. I said, okay, so explain it. Well, I can't. Okay. Well, then there was this other time when something, a rock was thrown at me, something. I'm like, so you're telling me you're in the woods, something throws a rock at you with, obviously needs a hand. It's a deer's not going to throw a rock at you. A bear's not going to throw a rock at you. And you hear these noises and this bipedal movement, and you're, as you explained, 3 miles back in the woods, and you don't think that maybe you've had an encounter. Well, I guess now that you look at it, I mean, I guess that is kind of different, isn't it? I heard some different sounds and blah, blah, blah. And I didn't know that what those sounds meant. So, well, I guess maybe there is. So, maybe they're uneducated about what they're even listening to or what they need to listen to or something like that. So anyway, but I think a lot of people may have had encounters. Even the non-believers may have had encounters if they've been in the woods.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I think it's sort of, it's one of those things where if you know what you're looking for, if you're familiar with those types of occurrences, it's easier to identify potentially if that is the case. And I mean, there's a flip side to that coin too. I mean, one can also jump to the wrong conclusion, but absolutely. But I did meet a lot of, one of the things that struck me the most was how many people up in those communities do not believe. And the one thing that kind of linked them all together was that it hadn't happened to them.
Yeah.
So
was there anybody that you met personally that had an encounter that struck you as being very believable, or the story was exceptional to you?
Yeah, like a lot of Sasquatch incidents, they tend to be fleeting, if not somewhat ambiguous. But the one that was really incredibly fascinating was one story which I mentioned in my book, and it involved a group of young teenage girls who were taken by a few adults to a cabin, to a really remote inlet outside of Bella Bella, and they were going to do like a camping trip in the cabin for it was like a long weekend sort of thing, and they were at-risk youth. It was a program for at-risk youth to kind of give them purpose and put them out on the land. And I went to this cabin. I went there after hearing the story by accident and didn't even realize I was going there. But so I did get to see how unbelievably in the middle of nowhere it was. But they basically went up there, and on the day that they arrived, they had dropped the girls off to dig clams because it's on the ocean. On a sort of stretch of beach, and then a handful of others went into the boat to lay crab traps, and they basically, as they were laying the crab traps, and they saw this Sasquatch, which was basically watching them. I think from the shore, basically from a rocky kind of rise on the shore, kind of crouched down, as you often hear of them. It's kind of a preferred position of the creatures, with its arms kind of around its knees, and they described it as its knees being kind of almost in the crouch position, almost as high as its head, kind of thing, like the really long limbs. And it just watched them with complete fascination. There was just this moment where they were staring at each other, and nobody knew what to do. And then one of the women freaked out. The creature stood up, and then in 4 steps it was back in the forest. And then again, because of the whole supernatural spiritual significance of the beings, the adults and the one child in the boat freaked out. They went to go rescue the kids who were digging clams on the beach. They were afraid that the creature would go and harm them, and they all ran into the cabin, barricaded themselves in, and just the creature apparently, the Sasquatch apparently, they thought disappeared. nightfall came. They had calmed down. They made some dinner. They had just sort of gotten back into a normal rhythm again. I think having digested and again, it was only 4 people who had seen it before, but that evening as they were cooking, they started hearing this rustling in the bushes. And I mean, it's a grizzly bear region. There's a lot of wildlife up there, but the difference was something crawled. The cabin was on stilts, maybe 4 feet above the ground, 3 feet above the ground, and climbed underneath. And so when you're in the cabin, like there are these sort of cedar, floorboards, but there are like these little, there are cracks in between the and so they could kind of like, they could smell the thing, they could sort of hear it, and it was like knocking, scratching, kind of like taunting them, kind of thing. Like it was sort of like,
it's crazy.
Being playful. They think being playful, right? But in retrospect, it was playful. But in the moment, they were completely terrified. And I think there was this kind of, and it wouldn't go. It stayed there the whole time. And they all climbed into their bunks, and eventually, one of the adults, the husband of one of the women who's running the program, went out with his little kind of small rifle or shotgun or something, and kicked open the door and fired into the air and stuff, and then shut the door, and then like barricaded the door with the furniture. And then I think the thing had run off. And then basically the next morning they had they all got back onto the boat, and they just got out of there, because it was just like, it was not a good situation for them to be in, to be that far out, and to have something like that kind of lingering around and bothering them. And
it could snatch somebody and be gone in a second. You would never even know it.
Yeah. And they have a lot of as you've heard, I'm sure, many times, they grow up with these stories. And so I think like it's not so much that they're traumatized by the idea of the animals. It was just that I think there's more of a fear in their culture, because they were taught as children to kind of not wander off too far, all of that stuff. Well, you've heard it before. So
so we still got a couple minutes here, but I also want to talk about your new book. I do believe it's your new book, correct? Veils of Distortion: How the News Media Warps Our Minds. So as Russ knows,
there's a transition.
Right. So this is a near and dear topic to me.
Okay.
Because I believe that the news media is absolutely pushed by their sponsors, no matter who that sponsor is. In the United States, our news is sponsored 72% of the time by Big Pharma. So Big Pharma is whatever they're pushing, Lipitor or Ozempic or whatever.
I've seen the commercials.
Or whatever that is, it's great. Whatever that is. And people that do not realize that I don't care if it's a late night talk show. I don't care if it's a satire news show. I don't care if it's AB, the national news at 6:00 that everybody used to watch with Walter Cronkite growing up back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
If your sponsor is a large portion of your income and they want you to go a certain direction, you are going to go a certain direction. I don't know if that's what your book has to deal with, but I do believe that this, the news media out there is kind of untrustworthy. They kind of have their own agendas. It's not the news anymore. It's simply, what's my agenda? What did I learn in college? I get out into the real world. I have a certain set of values. This man bad, this man good. I'm not going to look into what this man did because he's bad, because I've been taught that in my life. I don't care if it's political. I don't care if it's whatever that is. I just believe that the media is biased, and people watch it every day, and it divides us as a country, as a nation, as a people. Anyway, that's my take. I don't know if that has anything to do with your book or not, but
Yeah. So essentially, the book does cover those sorts of things. So my short answer would be yes. Now, because I've spent a lot of time in newsrooms, so I used to work at CBC, which is Canada's version of the BBC. It's our national broadcaster.
Okay.
Doing television, so it was
Okay.
TV news. I mean, I have experience in all the mediums, both as an employee and as a freelancer. But I worked in a television newsroom for over a decade, and also at Al Jazeera in the Middle East, doing the same thing, TV, more international. And because I got to be well acquainted with the process, like I describe it as a factory. It's a factory process. And so basically there's a beginning process and then there's an end process. Like there's where stuff comes in and then there stuff goes out. And so being a writer and having been exposed to this, I'm like, man, this is kind of a really this is be a really interesting topic for a book. And because I've seen so much done incorrectly in the newsroom, the book is essentially kind of about how the news, how the media distorts our view of reality. So it's kind of funny. It is sort of similar to In the Valleys of the Noble Beyond, because with Sasquatch, it was an exploration of perception. It's the same thing with here, where I basically talk about all the different filtering mechanisms, all of the different veils, all the different distortion aspects that cause a story to kind of warp this way or twist that way, or kind of be bent out of shape to look like something else, and how we as viewers because we don't know what goes on. Like, you don't know what goes on when a factory is like manufacturing food, right? Like, you don't know.
Sure.
It's sort of the same thing. We're consuming something. And in this case, it's ideas, it's information, it's in a lot of ways values and judgments about certain people, about the world, about the way the world is. And we don't really kind of know that, like, first and foremost, that the world is so much bigger and more complex and more nuanced and more varied than the way the news portrays it. If you just watch the news and you think, oh, the world is equal to what the news portrays every night or whatever, or you would view the world as just that portrayal, but in actuality. So it was an exploration, and each chapter kind of goes through all of the different distorting factors, from exaggeration to how the fact that the news is also entertainment. It's like, and there are ratings. I mean, it's a business, but right. It's a storytelling medium. And so what this is the most, if I was going to emphasize one point, I would emphasize this, but there are other really good points too, is that these are storytelling platforms, especially at the TV level. It's entertainment, it's storytelling, it's visual, it's sound. And when you tell any kind of a story, it can't be too complicated, or you lose the listener or the viewer. So you have to simplify everything. You have to kind of have a villain, you have to have a hero, and you have to have a victim. And so and you have to really kind of like make all of the qualifiers, and then you've got to eliminate the context. You have to eliminate all of the complicating stuff that kind of blurs it into grays. You know what I mean? Because if you blur it into grays, then there's no moral of the story. There's no, the bad guy remained the bad guy, and the hero was really a hero, and the victim was saved, or was you know what I mean? So so in a sense, what the news, going to what you just said a moment ago, the news caricatures the world into a type of simplicity. Like, it's almost like it makes it into a kind of a cartoon or something. And so as a result, it's more easily digested by our minds and brainwashed by the heavy value system attached to all of its main characters. And we lose the ability to sort of see a lot of the issues and the topics as being much more complex. And if you talk to an expert on any subject area that the news tends to address, they'll often tell you that a lot of things are not mentioned, or like they got stuff wrong, or this is overly simplified, or you know what I mean? So
oh yeah.
So every time I would leave work and go back in and leave and go back in, I would kind of go into work where the world was made more simple. And then I would leave work and go into the real world, the physical world, where stuff is actually, you're actually seeing it happen. Where it was much more complicated and much more complex and everything. And I think that's kind of what inspired me to work on the book, because there was a dissonance between the two. And I'm like, oh, and people were coming up to me going, hey man, you work in the newsroom. Like, why are you guys reporting this way? Or why are you guys saying this? Or like, and no one had any idea how the way this stuff is actually done. And so I just thought it might be kind of a service to tell people actually, how does it actually work on the inside? And that way they kind of know, and they can take it with a grain of salt when they watched or when they listened or when they read something, because you need that news literacy to be able to kind of navigate, I would say, to be able to kind of try and figure out what's more real or what's less real.
Like my grandfather always said, there's three sides to every story, right?
And perhaps more even, right?
I enjoyed it that you called it journalism. I thought that was an interesting way to put it.
Yes, churning out the product as quickly as possible.
Right.
And
based on news cycles. Now we're on such a short news cycle because we have these little things right here, and it's got to go across the TikTok or the Instagram, and it's only going to get so many views, and we're going to get so many impressions. So that story, as soon as the impressions start going down, I'm sure people are looking at that going, well, impressions are going down. Next, what's next? And even depending on what station is, or what, how that station is run by whoever that is, who is the villain? Over here, he's the villain. Over here is the hero. You know what I mean? Just perspective is what it is. But people have to realize that this is a world that, maybe you have to do a little bit of your own homework.
No, absolutely. And the comment that you made about it being divisive or polarizing is actually very true, because their attempt is to inspire outrage. It's like they want people to become emotional about something, which is, but also too, because since the internet came in and basically kind of took away all of their sources of advertising. You were mentioning advertising before. What news organizations have had to do to survive, and this is less talked about now because it's not as well known, but what news organizations have had to do to survive is whereas in the past they used to appeal to kind of a broad range of audience, politically speaking. It could be a bit left, it could be a bit right, but they would all watch the same news stations. Now they specialize to certain audiences, because that's where the audience is, that's where the clicks are, that's where the eyeballs are, and as a result, they cater the news to them, which is why you've got all these sort of silo projections of different news and different takes, different victims, heroes, and villains, basically. And so that's why you've got people who are like, they have their own view of the world, and they're like, hey man, your view is like totally different from mine. And this becomes the basis for fighting and feuding and everything. And so it's a mind F, if I will, what I mean?
Yeah.
It was, I remember it was like, I saw a stat of something about it. It was either a Rush Limbaugh, right? Maybe I think it was Rush Limbaugh. And it's like, Rush Limbaugh listeners that love Rush Limbaugh listen to him for 1.2 hours every day, or something like that. People that hate Rush Limbaugh listen to Rush Limbaugh 2.1 hours every day. So the people that hated him wanted to listen to him more to find out why he's, I hate you so much. I'm going to, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it's almost like, it's just that divisiveness in those people. And I guess, he was a certain type of person, but yet he brought in the numbers. So, but I thought that was, people, it is listeners are listeners, I guess, and clicks are clicks and eyeballs. So anyway,
I thought it was interesting too that you said that we're handed a tiny sample of dramatized events each day. And I thought, boy, how true is that?
Yeah.
And I mean, one can try and imagine the amount of potential stories out there on any given day, but you experience that as a TV news person, because what ends up happening is you will go into, when you're trying to find stories in the morning every day, because that's kind of what happens. You kind of go in and you're like, you pitch ideas, you go into Reuters or to AP, which are the wire services, and their job is to scour the globe and provide the content that then the TV stations or the news organizations can then come pick and choose. So you get to see every day what they've selected. And so many of those stories like never make it to the light of day. Like for years at CBC, I used to see, because I used to go through all the different regions of the world, there would be stories every day from India about this Maoist insurrection. Like for like the longest time, there were like these armed Maoists who were trying to take over in India. That was never a story. That was because we thought, well, our audience is not going to really be that interested in like a gunman who like killed a couple of people in some part of unknown. Like it was, there's so much happening. And so they choose, you know, it's curation. They're curating. They're going, oh, we're going to do this, and this. And I think even now they will even just focus on one story for a couple of hours and just like explore it in and out and not even look at other ones. So yeah, there's a lot going on in the world.
Okay. Open your eyes, people. Open your eyes. All right. John Zada, ZADA.com, correct?
JohnZada.com. Yes.
Zada. Okay.
Okay.
I saw some contact information on there, and you know, if somebody needs to get a hold of your book or something like that, then go right to Amazon. I saw it on Kindle. I saw it on hard copy. So both places. John, I appreciate your hour that you've given us.
Such an interesting man.
You know, yeah, you've been around the world, and I saw quite a few stories about all over the world, and you know, go to your website, you know, get your, you know, you have a blog on there. I think you write too. So
yeah,
people can read what you're doing. Russ has read the book. He said it's a great book. I will probably have to pick it up at some point and read it. So I will do that. So
okay.
I appreciate
Thanks, John.
Yeah, I appreciate you letting people know that the news is just entertainment, and it's sometimes maybe they need to look a little further. So, all right, John.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Night.
It's good chatting with you guys. Okay, thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, interesting fellow. Been around the world. Sasquatch, the news. We jumped right from big hairy things to other stuff.
You know, it's interesting how
so close to my heart.
How many people are how interesting many people are that are in Bigfoot world.
Yeah.
You know, and he was talking about Renee Hendon, and it was, you know, I had forgotten about it, but you know, Renee was, as he said, curmudgeon-y and had all these fights with everybody, and he lived in a trailer on a driving range, and that's how he made his money, was collecting those golf balls. And you know, then he would run off every time he got a Bigfoot sighting, and he'd collect these sightings. And he was really in the woods a lot, and he was good with witnesses, surprisingly, but he hated academics. He like Grover. That's why him and Grover Krantz were fighting all the time. Grover being the first academic that was involved in Bigfoot research, and they would just argue and argue and argue because, you know, Grover said they just sit in our offices all day. They're never in the woods.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, like, subscribe. The
Bigfootdoc.com.
There you go.
West Virginia Bigfoot on Facebook.
There you go.
Reach up there. It helps us when you do the like thing. We appreciate that.
Yep. Wide Open Research on Instagram. Always trying to put some new stuff out there, especially when I get back to the bunker and have some time. So other than that, got anything else?
No, sir. It's good to see you, my friend. Thanks, everybody.
Nice seeing you. And we are out of here.